Hello, my name is Alex Wier, and I teach at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I wanted to talk today about approaching some auxiliary percussion instruments like tambourine and triangle in hopefully an efficient and more holistic way. And that is through the use of some materials you might have laying around, like a snare drum method book and some other printed materials. So this is certainly nothing brand new or unique or anything I came up with, as a lot of people do this. So this is more for anyone out there who might not have heard this suggestion before, or for people who may have barely scratched the surface, because it is quite a broad general idea that can be applied in thousands of different ways. But it can really, I think, be a lot of fun when you're practicing and very gratifying, because you can be very creative, explore things in a very individual way, and therefore it can be very fun and gratifying, not only the process and the act of practicing, but also that end result of your progress. As I said, can be more efficient and well-rounded. So before I get into some of the details of some examples, I just want to say more generally too that this can be very helpful when thinking about it, contrasting to how we approach other instruments like our snare drum and our keyboard. Often we do have a warm-up, or we play exercises and scales that are based on specific technical demands, or expanding our control and ideally our musicianship through things that are not repertoire or can be based on repertoire, but the things we're actually playing are for the sake of bettering our approach to the instrument. And when we contrast that to often how especially younger students might pick up a tambourine or triangle only when they get a part in an ensemble, or when you get to a point in your curriculum or career where you have to take auditions or you have to work on orchestral excerpts, that's when they suddenly start to work on this stuff and they dive right into excerpts, which can be very technically demanding. That's why they're often our standard excerpts. And if we treat a little bit these instruments like we do the snare drum and keyboard, where we're working on our approach to them on a more regular basis, our comfort level, our touch, our control, and ultimately our musicianship again will grow more efficiently, and we'll be able to tackle those parts and those excerpts a little better when they do come up on the road. So I know, we're limited to 24 hours a day. We can't practice all of our percussion instruments, for hours and hours and hours. So I'm not equating necessarily minute to minute what you do on the snare drum to, say, a tambourine. But again, more about the approach here and how you're spending your time, what you're trying to do out of that with that time. That'll make the difference. So we'll move into some specific examples here. So I have today just this Alfred's drum book, something I've encountered a number of times throughout the years, but this is just an example of kind of a stock beginning book that works, from introducing note values and dynamics into specific snare drum things like rolls. But there are a lot of snare drum books out there that could fill the same kind of purpose for this. And if you have one or several, you could also borrow friends or colleagues' books too to really kind of get going with this idea. Now we'll pull up lesson 4 in that Alfred's drum method book that I showed you. And this is earlier on in the book. It's introducing eighth rests. Now after the earlier pages of quarter notes and rests and eighth notes. So you look at this page and it seems pretty simple. There's no dynamics there for one, and the rhythms themselves are not that extremely challenging. But that's kind of the point. You want material that you can be playing that's not occupying most of your brain power. You want to be spending most of your time really being thoughtful about how you're approaching the instrument, how you're playing them, and what sound is coming out. So the most fundamental approach, place to start, is just simply playing these simple rhythms in time. Use a metronome, record yourself, because the tambourine with the jingles and the triangle being a sustaining instrument, and these different triangle beaters that you might use, they produce sound differently and they articulate differently than like a snare drum. So just because you can play in time on a snare drum does not mean that you're guaranteed to come over, pick up a tambourine, and have precision in your tempo and in your rhythmic playing. So using a metronome to just check in on that and be real critical of how your articulation and your sound is coming through from a consistency standpoint. Of course, going across the dynamic range too, right? If you can play consistently at forte, that doesn't mean you can at pianissimo. So working a wide range of dynamics, and then when you start to feel locked in there, you can start pushing tempo higher and lower, slower to really subdivide and have that control. And once you do that for several days, you could spend a whole week on this one page. You could start to get into some other specifics. So like a triangle, I have my Black Swamp Legacy bronze triangle here. It's hand hammered, and you can get quite a few different types of sounds out of this instrument, which is a cool artistic possibilities as you're playing to be able to choose and create different sounds. But it's also can be a pitfall for someone who's not paying attention, right? If you're just trying to play 4 quarter notes and you're moving around and you get 4 different sounds and you don't want to or don't intend to, that's not ideal. So having an awareness of the instrument, the very specific instrument that you're holding and playing, and what the sound you're trying to create from not just a rhythmic and note standpoint, but a tone quality standpoint, is important. And then doing some different shaping exercises too. So for line 1 on this page, working on complete evenness and control, but then maybe doing kind of a taper. So from the first note, you're kind of tapering down on each group of 3. So you're working on your touch there. And line 2, you could kind of do the opposite, starting on the offbeat and kind of growing over the group of 3. Just to further challenge, besides playing completely even. And then even line 3, you could say, well, that looks like the easiest line on the whole page because all you gotta do is play on the beat. But again, having more of a creative approach and eye for this, you could say, well, maybe I'll work on my articulation there with the rest. So measures 1 and 3, I'll try to do a little bit of feathering with my back fingers or middle finger to try to get a little more articulation. Hear the difference between the measures with 8th rest in it and the measures that have just quarter notes. And for a triangle, that can be really helpful as you start to play parts in orchestra and band with a more kind of musical mindset, because very rarely do we completely just grab and choke a triangle. Obviously big stops and in the whole ensemble, you'd want to take out all the sound, but if you're trying to play a line and kind of do some light feather muffling for clarity and articulation, that's much more common than you would take out the entire ring of the triangle. It doesn't sound very organic to muffle it, like a light switch. It's either on or off. We want to kind of deal with more shades of gray there. So that's a lot of possibilities just on a simple page of rhythms like this, of 8th notes and quarter notes. And put up another page here, Solo 12, which is later in the book after they've gone through a variety of the other topics of dynamic ranges. Obviously rolls are in this one now, so I'll pick up my TC1 tambourine here, and so just at face value you could see all the different dynamic possibilities here. So that of course is a challenge in itself. The different rolls for the tambourine offer different possibilities of when you might shake roll or finger roll. So a kind of general approach would be to play forte and above, you'd shake roll, maybe mezzo forte or mezzo piano, and below you do finger rolls. But of course you could mix and match, you can change things in here as you're trying to work specifically different techniques that you want to get better at. So I'll just play a little bit here first and talk just a little bit more about it. And I'll stop there just for now. So you could see the switch I made with the pickup into the third line that dropped down to piano to a finger rolls in that third and fourth line. I also tried to bring out the written accent on the start of some of those 9-stroke rolls in those lines, which is an important element, I think, for me and many of my students working on any rolls on a tambourine. You can get a lot of false accents, either on the starts or the release of rolls. So making sure you're not doing that in general on any rolls, and then when you do have a written accent, of course, you're bringing out with a quality sound and not overdoing it. So just like anything you practice on any instrument, ideally you would break things up, right? If you want to maybe sight read this whole solo once when you first look at it, just for fun, of course you can do that, but don't just sit there and kind of run it over and over again. You'll get incrementally better, but you'll really see some progress if you tackle each piece and you kind of, again, are looking for something specific for the sound and your approach to it. So, for example, you can just play the first measure or two as their own kind of exercise at different tempos, different dynamics, where you're thinking about that kind of the roll, start, and releases being clean, how your shake roll sounds, or if you're working on your finger roll, and you're really breaking it apart bit by bit. And then as you maybe add more and more to that, you build on top of it, you're looking for the contrasting section. So is my fortissimo on the first line, does it truly drop just one notch lower to forte in the second line? And then do I have a lot of contrast in that piano drop down? When I do the repeat at the towards the end of the fourth line, am I really jumping back up to forte? And on and on and on. So we could talk about this for a really long time, but I hope this gives you a sense of the possibilities that you can then explore further on your own. All right, so I hope this helps give you some ideas for practicing. Again, I think this is very fun and gratifying because you can take such a creative approach. It's based on exploring and kind of tailoring to your interests and needs kind of in the moment, in the practice session, versus just feeling obligated and required to learn, a certain number of notes on the page in front of you. And, taking this, you can build up and see the progress, within 1 week. And as the weeks go by, you can work into other books and try other things. And maybe you go from this beginning snare drum book to the end of the book and into an intermediate snare drum book, and you're doing things and tackling projects and excerpts that maybe you would have thought were impossible weeks prior, but now that you have this kind of newfound technique and thought process for playing these instruments, you're doing great new things with your approach to the instruments as well as being a musician on the instruments. So for other materials, again, it's really open-ended, but things like your music theory or sight singing textbooks could have rhythmic exercises. The Morris Goldenberg snare drum book has some great rhythmic duets, so you can do this kind of thing with a buddy. It's a lot of fun. Other books that are very popular, like Ted Reed's Syncopation, which is used a lot for drum set independence, can work well for this. And there's books, a little more tailored to these accessory instruments and being more open. And one example of that is Norman Weinberg's Touch, which he takes orchestral excerpts of other instruments, themes and melodies that other instruments play, and writes them out. And the goal is for you to pick a percussion instrument and to play with a lot of style, character, and musicianship matching that original theme and melodies on our percussion instruments. So a lot of fun can be had in mixing up your materials and of course practicing all of them in different ways. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or want to talk about some more. You can easily find my email address at my website or the UWM website, and I'm on social media, things like that. I'm happy to help. And just remember, it's always about your thoughtfulness and your awareness of what you're doing while you're practicing. It's not about the hours. It's about how you're spending your time and what you're trying to achieve. So I hope this helps and you have some fun.